Hello, so today we're going to be practicing intermediate tab stops. So last week I introduced these, and tab stops are difficult, even the easy ones when you're first starting out, but these are a little bit more difficult. So we've got this information, which you can download, and when you've finished, it's going to look like this. Right, so what's the difference here? It's a bunch of tab stops and leaders. And so we'll talk about why each one of them is what it is. So you're trying to make yours look like this. Let's not get too concerned about where my tab stops are. Like, for example, you can see that I put one at 6 inches here, but if you put it at 5 1/4 or something, it doesn't matter to me, just so long as you've got some level of consistency happening. So that's just a little snapshot of what it looks like. So let's get doing this. And so I talked about tab stops last week, and I have a pretty good video on this. So if you're still struggling with this, which I'm sure a lot of you are, review those videos. I can't, I'm just going to be covering the same things here that I've done there, so I'm going to do this pretty quickly. So you really have no shot at getting anywhere with tab stops unless you press show hide or look at the hidden characters. So that shows you both how many tab stops there are and where they are. So these first 3 lines just have one tab stop / leader, and so if I were really wanted to do this, I could select all 3 of them. I'm not particularly, I think when you're just learning, that's a bad idea. I'll show you a better way to do it. And so you might be wondering, is that a right, left, or a center tab stop over here? Well, since there's no text, it really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to drop one at 6 inches, and that doesn't do anything. But when you double click on it, now you've got the choice to go in there and add a number 2 leader, which is what I use more often than not. And there we go. First line's done. Now I mentioned I kind of don't like doing wholesale tab stops and leaders because it's so easy to format paint them. Right? Sometimes you're going to make a mess, and if you don't know what I mean by that, it probably means you haven't practiced enough. But sometimes these things get messy, and it's better to make a small mess and maybe clean that up than a huge mess. This one, so there's an extra tab there, which I need to fix. Alright, it's fixed. Your sheet didn't have that, mine does, so I'm a little out of date here, or out of sync. There's a tab stop there, and there's a tab stop there. So if I want to figure out what I need to do, you got to ask yourself, how are those words lined up? If you notice, it's the left edge of the words that are lined up, which means that's a left tab stop. And you just have to look at it, and so I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to switch that to a left tab stop. In the previous lines, it didn't matter what I did. I don't care where it is. 3 inches seems pretty good. Now over here, it does not matter what tab stop I do. Okay, so I'm fighting with my word a little bit here. I don't know if I tried to edit it out, but my word's just kind of jumping around on me. I literally fixed nothing. So I need leaders. So I'm going to double click on one of these tab stops. They actually both need leaders, and this is kind of annoying, but this is how it goes. You have to set it for one, and then select the other, and set it for the other. If you want to set both at once, you got to do that. And I just did it for one paragraph. I'm going to format paint that down to here. Right, so that is done. This bottom one down here is more difficult, and here's where the show hide button is essential. See, there's 2 tabs here. 2 tabs, which just seems weird. I'll explain what it is and what it isn't. Let's look at the finished example. You see how there's a gap between the leaders. This actually increases readability. It's a pretty good effect, actually. I mean, you will see this pretty common, but it's a little bit of a hassle to create. This worked fine here with no gap between the fields, but it's a little cleaner looking like that. So there's what I like to call an empty tab stop in there. So let's get after this one. So I'll do this first column first. So the first tab stop, it doesn't matter what kind it is. I'm just going to arbitrarily try that out. And there's a little gap between the leader and the word, so there's actually just a tiny tab stop like that. So I put one at 2 1/2, one at 3. I'm just kind of winging it. The final tab stop does need to be a right tab stop, because if I look at this right here, oh, actually I lied, it doesn't. Sorry, I was thinking there was a word over there, but there's not. So this could be whatever I wanted it to be. Alright, so now it's a matter of creating leaders, which is the more challenging part. So I'm going to just click on any tab stop. Notice the first tab stop in the paragraph is always selected. I'm just going to do the last one because I think it's the most straightforward. So the tab stop at 6 inches definitely wants a leader. So I set it, I go okay, that looks good. Now let's deal with these guys. Notice if I click on the first tab stop, well, I mean, you get to the same place as anything else. It just doesn't matter. So I gotta ask myself, does the tab stop at 2 1/2 need a line leading up to it? It does. I click OK, and I'm done. So the thing I would like to point out, watch if I click on the one at 3 inches. Oops, I accidentally created a new one. I'm sure you will do that at some point if you haven't yet. Notice the one at 3 inches does not have a leader, which makes sense, and that's where our gap comes from. So I call that an empty tab stop. It's nothing more than creating some space and also increasing the readability. I'm going to format paint this down to the 3rd tab stop because that's exactly the same. And how about this for a weird little trick? I don't particularly recommend it, but you might learn something by seeing it. This paragraph here is nothing like this one in terms of tab stops, but that's actually not entirely true. I'm going to format paint the tab stops of this paragraph, and you're like, oh, that wasn't very good. Well, this tab stop doesn't need to exist, so I'm just going to pull it off. And that didn't get us anywhere, but this one also doesn't need to be there. And, right, that worked. Why did that work? Well, so those other 2 tab stops weren't relevant to this paragraph because there's only one physical tab pressed, but that 6-inch tab stop is exactly the same as the tab stop that was used here. It just didn't have some other ones in front of it. So now you know what I mean by more advanced tab stops. This was quite a bit more difficult than what we did last week, but if you had your head wrapped around the things that we were doing last week when we got introduced to this, hopefully you're following the conversation, and it's just a matter of sinking in some time. This is one of those concepts that does take some time to get your head wrapped around for many students. Much of what we do doesn't really require a lot of practice. It's pretty mechanical. Just head to the Home tab, press the bold button, right, or insert a table. But this, you actually need to understand where you're going with it and have a game plan. And sometimes you realize you're just making a great big mess, and sometimes it's easier to start over. As you can see, I've talked about tab stops 2 weeks in a row. This isn't one of those concepts that's going to go away, and it's not that easy to pick up. So, that's why I'm creating plenty of resources on it. So, good luck.